Good morning. It is 10:23 a.m. on Sunday, February 7th. No, February 5th, 2017. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. Today, of course, is Sunday, and that means it is time to continue a rewatch of Avatar: The Last Airbender with season 2, episode 4, The Swamp. This is another filler episode in regards to the main plot, but it's an interesting one for all of that. There's lots of additional world building detail that's kind of fun. We bookend the episode with Zuko. Boy, I am all over the place today. With Zuko and Iroh. We don't get very much, except that we see at the very beginning, we see that these two have now been reduced to literally begging for coins. And Iroh is pretty cheery about all of that, but then again, he's always been a make the best of it sort of thing. He seems really even much happier now in his current situation than he was continuing to serve Fire Nation armies, certainly when he was temporarily under the command of Admiral Zhao. But then it's not necessarily that he's happy as much as he is the sort of person who finds ways to be happy where he is and makes the best of things. But Zuko is not enjoying this. He is starting to get increasingly bitter and resentful. And this is even after having stolen that ostrich horse thing last time. He's going to do something. We can tell. It's building. And so when that random Earth Kingdom swordsman guy comes along and bullies Iroh into dancing at sword point and singing a song for a gold coin, Iroh is actually fairly happy because he's kind of thinking, well, I don't really care about having to dance while I sing a song. That's fine. I like singing, and he'll give us gold coin. But Zuko sees this as deeply humiliating and embarrassing, and he's very frustrated. So then at the end of the episode, we see the return of the Blue Spirit mask. And so we are given the impression that we'll be getting more on that as the season progresses. But there's not very much to it in this episode. So the bulk of the swamp follows Aang and Katara and Sokka as they're flying towards through the Earth Kingdom, and they start heading over a swamp, and Aang feels drawn to it in kind of a hypnotic way, in a way that he can't fully understand. And his impulse is to want to listen to that because Bumi told him that he needs to be able to stop and listen to the world around him, the earth around him, and that seems to be what's happening here. And yet, for Katara and Sokka, they're saying, that looks like a really nasty, ominous swamp. I don't really want to go down there. And sure enough, they insist that it doesn't seem like a good idea. And Aang is willing to cooperate. He has the feeling he should go down there, but he's willing to listen to his friends. Unfortunately, something seems like it really wants them to go down there. Get a tornado come up out of nowhere, sufficiently powerful that even Aang's airbending is unable to protect them, and the kids and Appa and Momo are all scattered into the swamp. We start with the kids together and Appa and Momo separated, but then even the kids get separated too. There's lots of nice little detail, like a fun moment where we may have wondered why the kids don't blow the whistle they have to call Appa to them. But then we see that it's because it was left behind on Appa's saddle. And so Momo blows it, and annoying Appa from having the whistle blown way up close. It's a fun little way to show us that bit of plot detail rather than just have the kids say, should we blow the whistle? We can't, we don't have it. Instead, we get a fun little moment where we can see Appa and Momo trying to find the kids and not necessarily fully understanding what's happening about that. So there's a few things going on in this episode down there in that swamp. There's Sokka's continued desire to have things be non-supernatural and just normal. And it's interesting because while I am frequently sympathetic towards Sokka's position, he is the skeptic of the group, but it's also occasionally a little unreasonable for him to feel that way because they live in a world where things like bending and things like spirits are manifestly part of the natural world. Well, you might make a supernatural, natural distinction, but real nonetheless. And almost unquestionably real. So to always insist that there must be a logical explanation for something is occasionally an unrealistic and unreasonable perspective to have. But certainly I relate to that feeling of thinking that maybe it's not always something natural, but it is more often than people guess. So he's kind of constantly trying to tell everyone, you guys are being superstitious, you guys are worrying over nothing. And so he's going around chopping through the vines with his sword, breaking off pieces of wood to make a fire with. And Katara and Aang are both kind of, their instinct is to say that's not a good idea, but they're also not insisting in a way that would make him actually stop. Which just occurs to me, there's a little bit of a dynamic in this episode. I'm trying to think if there's an example of Katara doing it, and I'm not sure there's an obvious one. But the idea that these three kids are being fairly democratic. No, well, actually, I guess they're not, because both Katara and Aang were on that side. The kids are being wary of forcing their views on each other at the moment. So Aang felt like they should go down into the swamp, but was willing to listen to Katara and Sokka. But Katara and Sokka didn't demand that he not. They just expressed their feeling that it was a bad idea. I don't know. I'm not sure I have anywhere to go with that idea. It was just a connection that sort of occurred to me as I talked. But so, without just going through plot point by plot point rehash of the episode, I think the things that are most interesting in this episode are the swamp people, because we discover about halfway through that while they are initially played largely for laughs, and that doesn't completely go away at any point, we discover midway through the episode that they have their own form of waterbending. And that's interesting because up to this point, we'd kind of had the impression that waterbenders were limited to the northern and southern pole water tribes. And that's clearly not the case here. And they have their own moves that are different. And I like that. It's like my desire in the Star Wars universe to have more expressions of people who are aware of and perhaps sensitive to the Force, but who are not Jedi, who have some different path that they follow. in relation to that. But this is not a Star Wars discussion. So we have these swamp people who have their own way of life there that is relatively isolated in the sense that no one else really seems to know much about it. But they've got their own things going. They've got catfish alligator buddies and I guess it was a catfish crocodile. Their own form of water bending. There's a fun joke near the end where Sokka goes to toss one of the bugs to the crocodile thing and doesn't want it, and the river swamp guy is like, "What are you doing? You threw a bug at him. That's people food." Anyway. And we also have that swamp person shaman sort who is there to protect the swamp, and that's where a lot of the hostility came from when they reach this tree and they're attacked by what looks like a giant swamp monster in an excellent comic bit because, of course, the kids had just been discussing whether or not something actually brought them there, and Sokka insists there is nothing out there trying to get us, and then this giant swamp thing immediately rises up out of the swamp and attacks. I feel like the action of fighting the thing goes on maybe a little bit long, but the choreography is good enough, and there's some interesting things happening there, especially with Katara using her water bending in an interesting way to cut the vines that make up this thing's body, and trying to do it quickly enough that it can't just keep restoring itself. And then, of course, the gradual reveal that it's just a person inside. And we discover, as he describes later, that it is an advanced form of water bending. He is bending the water in the vines to control the vines, which is a form of water bending we haven't seen before. But does start to, without getting spoilery about it, it is kind of an introduction to an idea that we'll see more developed later. But then there's also the visions, and what else is going on in this swamp besides the swamp people and this one particular shaman attacking in the form of a swamp monster. And that there is clearly some sort of energy and intention to this swamp, which we discover is actually one great big organism spread over many miles. And that is made into an allegory of people and our connections to each other, which is a nice sentiment, and I appreciated it, even if it didn't for this episode make any direct connections to the rest of the plot, other than it is part of Aang's ongoing education and understanding of the world. So while this swamp doesn't directly move the plot in any one way, it's an education for Aang of the kinds of things that are in the world that can shape how he sees the world. Namely, the connections between people, even when it would seem initially like they're not connected. And of course, we have visions, and we're introduced to things like Aang being able to see anywhere in the swamp by touching the root of the tree. Katara sees a vision of her mother. Sokka sees a vision of Yue. And the visions seem kind of scary, or at least spooky and unpleasant, but at the same time, it certainly was motivating in a way that brought the kids back together at this giant tree. Aang's vision is still a little bit more mysterious. It seems to have been a young girl with a pig pet that he didn't know, and the shaman implies, well, perhaps time is distorted here, and that might be someone you will meet in the future. And so we'll have to see. So this video is shorter than I think most of my videos are, but that's, I think, perhaps just because we have a little bit of a bottle episode here where the kids go on a little side quest through this swamp, learn a lesson, meet some interesting world-building details, and then are going to get back on their way. So not everyone has to be complex, but there's a lot of fun detail in here, and that's part of the joy of this show, is that while I love the plot and the character dynamics and everything too, it's also just such a great fleshed out world that has so many fun little details in it. So that's it for this time, and I'll be back next week on Sunday to talk about episode 5 of season 2. And in the meantime, I will talk to you tomorrow for 5 more minutes.